Hi, kitty cats. Last week I talked about the history of science and religion, as well as their uneasy alliance against magic. But we still see magical techniques in use today, and not for mystical revelation, but for understanding our world and ourselves. So, does divination offer another path to wisdom? Can we use divination to improve our situation in life, even if it isn't strictly scientific? Yeah, you bet we can. And that's what we're going to discuss today. All right, so my name, I need to go and mute something. Here we go. All right, so I am Dr. Amethyst Herrick. I am an author and a podcaster, and I discuss identity and gender from a scientific standpoint. You can check this link below here. You can get much more information about me and the work that I do. The website you'll see there, that's purplepawclan.com. You are able to follow me on all of the social media networks that I'm on. Maybe not all the ones that you're on, but you can follow me on all the networks, as well as read my articles, view my podcasts, anything that I put on the Purple Paw website there. So if you like this content, and I hope you do, please consider subscribing at purplepawclan.com. You can get a subscription for as low as $5 a month, and it would support continuing to make content just like this. I also publish articles and podcasts by other contributors. So if you are at all interested in contributing original work on identity and gender, I encourage you to email me. Once again, you're going to find a contact page at purplepawclan.com, and I'd love to publish you. So there we go. There's my live stream opening plugs. Let me first say hello to Genevieve. Good to see you. Always good to see you. So let's see. So last week, well, let me take a step back, actually, because I've spent a lot of time talking about science. And maybe you're looking at this going, are we really going to talk about tarot? And yes, I've spoken at length about science in society and science and society, the social constructs that ultimately we build up around some of the scientific some of the observations that we make of nature. And the thing that I've noticed, and this goes back right a couple of months now, most people that I'm talking to appear to form an opinion and then attempt to rationalize it with observations, even if those observations are very old ones, like, for instance, the binary of XXXY for sex, which we've known is not the case for quite a while now. So, this is not on the conservative side either. I want to point out this is not just the conservative side, and this is why I decided that ultimately it's not really worth my time to debate people who are not qualified to understand the science, who don't understand the science. So, turning something off there. So instead, what I want to do is mitigate the effects of what happened, in this debate, this so-called debate. So I'm trying to mitigate this, because those who want to debate me, really what they want to do is bring legislation. Because as it turns out, in the absence of science, in the absence of having really good reasons, you just use force. You're just going to legislate things. You don't agree with me, that's fine. I'm just going to legislate you out of existence. And we are seeing this, certainly, in the conservative rhetoric today. And I want to help people get through that. If for no other reason than I certainly don't seem to be teaching much science through those debates. Because, I don't think these are people using science to come to a conclusion, but rather forming an opinion and then justifying it with scientific facts. So, let me also say hello to my wife Ildiko there, Ildiko Herrick. Hi. It's always cool to get the to acknowledge my wife here. All right, so last week we talked about science and religion, so like the history. Talked a lot about that and how it turned into this unfortunate disenchantment of the world. I believe, and this was a lot of what came out of last week's live stream. I believe that magic is not anti-science. Magic was the original idea of science because being curious about our world, being curious about how it works, being curious about whether we can affect it, that's natural. And that's what we do. However, curiosity does require being able to accept that certain actions can be effective without us necessarily understanding why it is. So that live stream was pretty theoretical, but did serve as a foundation for this week's. Just realized I'm not showing any comments. There we go. So if you're a subscriber on my YouTube channel, or then you've seen that I released a podcast. I guess it doesn't just have to be on that channel, because you can find this podcast all over the place: Spotify, Amazon, like all over, Apple Podcasts. So I released a podcast on Friday that's worth checking out. By the way, it was with Dr. Allison Battles, who is a psychologist, licensed clinical psychologist. So I met Allison at a conference. She did a talk about tarot and how it fit into her own healing modalities. So here's Ash. Hi, Ash. I'm glad to see you. I hope you're doing okay. So she was a fascinating person. And obviously, I think this podcast was also very interesting because Allison also uses things like role-playing games. It's fascinating. She uses role-playing games also as a therapeutic modality. Now, the purpose of this, for what it's worth, is it gives her clients, it gives them the ability to explore their identity in a safe place. And I've spoken a bit about role-playing games, tabletop role-playing games, in my own work. So it was great to see somebody who actually uses them as part of therapy. It's pretty cool. Now we're going to return to this. We're going to return to I'm bringing Allison up for a purpose, and I will return to it. But that podcast, as I edited it this week, it really made me think about tarot as a good example of how we can use the results of an action that very likely has no rational explanation. And so this takes me back to last week's discussion around science and religion and how they, work together to boot magic out of the picture. Now, the key takeaway on this, in that particular live stream, first of all, let me say hello to Brenda. Is it a perfect day? Because Brenda says, hope I'm having a perfect day. It's much better now that I know you're here. How about that? Does that work? The key takeaway of last week's live stream was that Western science and Western religion deny a life force, ultimately some sort of a life force. And you go, what is a life force? What does this even mean? We see this all over outside of Western society. There's ki in Japan, chi in China, prana is what it is in India, Indian philosophies. And checking something here. So it represents the integration of matter and spirit. It's almost kind of like a power that operates the universe, that you have material things, and those material things are driven by, a life force. Now, in order to combat this, science and religion had to band together to get rid of it, because science wanted to be the bastion of matter. Religion wanted to be the bastion of spirit. Can't have something that bridges the two, not at all. But we know that there are aspects of the human experience that will struggle to explain and ultimately probably reject if we don't recognize the existence of a life force. At the very least, science would probably brush it under the rug, and I brought up a few last week. Meditation's a great one. When meditation tends to help people clear their heads very well. We don't know why. And so, for the most part, Western medicine doesn't really embrace it. Another one of those examples is divination. And I love divination. I'll tell you why. This is what we're going to talk about today. So I want to ask the questions and then answer them. right? Because that's what I do. What is divination? What does that even mean? What does it mean to do divination? And I think a more important question, why did humanity use divination? I want to talk a little bit about how divination is typically practiced. And then from there, we're going to focus on what's my particular fave method of divination, which is the tarot. And so I'll talk a little bit about some tarot techniques, although not that much. And then we're going to get to the idea of what can we get out of using tarot in the first place? Like, why am I doing this? Why am I talking about this at all? As per usual, I do want this to be a, where's the, oh, there it is. As per usual, I want this to be a conversation. I don't want to just do a lecture. I'd love to take your questions. I'd love to answer anything that comes up. Especially if you go, why is this scientist talking about tarot? Hopefully I'll get to all of those points. But if I don't, if I don't have notes for it, you may have a point that I didn't think about. So ask. If you have questions, drop them in the comments because I'd love to hear them. All right, so divination. Divination is part of what I would simply call the search for truth. All inquiry, all human inquiry, I guess non-human inquiry too, for that matter, but it begins with a search for truth. At least in our history, in human history, we wanted to know, like, who should be the next king or queen. Are our crops going to grow well this year? Are they going to be plentiful this year? Are we going to have a baby? Is my baby going to be healthy? Is Judy going to say yes when I ask her to the prom? It doesn't have to be particular life questions there. I don't know who Judy is, but Judy, will you go to the prom with me? The point here is that humanity always wants to know what's going to happen. That's a distinction there. Humanity wants to know what will happen. Typically, the why is kind of secondary. The why is left to sciencey people like I am. Just, what's going to happen. Normally, we don't care about why. And as a result, usually we turn to people when we want to know what will happen. We turn to people who stand outside the norm. So if you are queer, by the way, perk your ears up here, okay? I'm talking to you. Usually we talk to people, we turn to people who stood outside the norm. Sometimes these were sovereigns, right? You had kings and queens, local lords and ladies. Even if they knew nothing about divination, they will go, well, who's going to get the cow? You get the cow. That's doesn't make a difference. These people made decisions. But oftentimes we saw liminal people. If you look at particularly Celtic history, particularly British Celtic history, we had, and it doesn't even have to be Celtic, but particularly British history, European history, we had bards and jesters. These were people who held no position. They were jokesters, or they told they told stories, sang songs, but they could change the course of kingdoms with a single satirical joke. They weren't in power, but they weren't out of power either. They were sort of fools, but they weren't entirely fools, because kings would go, "Ooh, gosh, that's a good point." The bard could make a comment, or the jester could make a comment that no courtier ever would, no royal person ever would, because they would be embarrassed to do so. These were people who were liminal. We're really talking about people who are not bound by social conventions. And of course, as I said, this includes the queer community. And I mean, looking back in history, there were people, homosexual or bisexual, transgender, the things that we are liminal. We sit outside some of these norms, or we straddle the lines of these norms. We are liminal, and that gave us power. Power. We were oracles, we were seers, we were magicians. Is it any surprise whatsoever the Western religion vilifies us so strongly? We bridge these gaps between sexuality and gender, and we would be some of the people who would be powerful. And as Western religion, of course, grew in its own power, it was important for them to try to diminish us as much as possible because we were competition, if nothing else. So Brenda makes an exceptional point. Brenda says she's not outside the norm, everyone else is. I actually really appreciate that. When we think of a social norm, right, does this have to mean that it's accurate? Does it have to mean that it's truth? No, it's a social norm. It just means that most people in that social environment think it's kind of normal. But it doesn't mean it's necessarily a good thing. So thank you, Brenda. Excellent point. As far as people who used to dispense the truth, I've got a couple of examples from history. One of them is Boudica, actually talking about Celtic Britain. Boudica was a British tribal queen. She ended up uniting actually several of the British tribes. I'm trying to remember. Northern Iceni, just the regular Iceni. I want to say Cartimandua might have gone along with her too. Maybe not. Anyway, the point was she united many of the British tribes against the Romans. This was, first century of the Common Era. The Romans come back in. They're like, we're going to take all over, and started doing really, really wacky stuff. Boudica ultimately ends up going, that's it. I'm pissed off. Marches all of her people south, enough people south to attack the Romans in the south of England, south of the Isle of England now. At the time called Britannia by the Romans, although called Albion by the actual people who lived there. So, running with that. Anyway, the point was that Boudica gets there. They're kind of facing off. The Romans are in a like a little valley kind of thing, and Boudica thinks, I've got the high ground, like Anakin. What could go wrong? I don't know. Maybe I shouldn't have used that particular metaphor. So she takes a hare, like a rabbit. She releases a hare to determine the outcome of the battle. Hare runs a particular direction, and she goes, sweet, we're totally going to win. Charge, let's go defeat the Romans. Turned out that divination was wrong, as it turns out, and she suffered. She died. Her people were very badly beaten by the Romans, and then the Romans were like, well, cool, now we can really take over this island. So it's kind of a bummer there. So that was a divination that went wrong. But then you also have the oracle at Delphi. Let's think about the oracle of Delphi. She at one point, the Pythia, called Socrates the wisest man in Athens. And what happened? Socrates goes on, this is when he was pretty young. Socrates goes on to become one of the pillars, really truly the pillars of Greek philosophy. You might also point out he also died as a result, and maybe this isn't the greatest example as well, but these were times. So now Boudica is using divination to say, am I going to be able to succeed against the Romans? The oracle at Delphi is calling out, somebody who is an important person. These divinations were important, changed history, ultimately made history. Thistle is having quite a day, I see. What the? So all of this, so divination, what does that word even mean? What it means, it has divine in it. There's also ties to inspiration. So divination means speaking with the gods, speaking with the breath of the gods, speaking to the gods, speaking for the gods. But there's an exchange with the gods so that you attain knowledge that you might otherwise not have had. And, this boils down to the idea that if you have a life force that operates the universe, and that's the way we would look at gods and goddesses. These are life forces that ultimately operate the universe. We're not really part of it, but they can direct us and direct the life force, and that's what these gods and goddesses do. So when we have this operation of the universe, we can petition it. We can ask what's going to happen, and maybe even change it if necessary. And at base, this is one of the simplest definitions of magic, for what it's worth. You can look at Aleister Crowley and all of his definitions and Dion Fortune's definitions of magic, but really the point is petitioning the life force of the universe to change something. And at the end, it all comes down to truth. We may, especially in Western society, we claim that we love science. But I mean, you can look around us. It's not true. I mean, we want to say that we do. We want to say that we are a scientific people and everything's going to be scientific, but you can see that isn't true. Really what we want is to ask the universe to do what we want it to. Divination is a way to try to make this happen. Hey, Matt. Good to see Matt just showed up. Thank you for the gifts. So divination isn't a way to make this happen. We ultimately, at base, what we want to do is know that things are going to turn out all right. And we want to confirm, first of all, that we're right, that it is going to turn out all right. But we also want to confirm that we, personally, are on the right side of history. And maybe Boudica and Socrates were not the best for that. But the search for truth, that is where divination ends up coming in. That's the whole purpose of it. Let me check comments here. I don't have anything yet. Somebody ask me something. Ask me something about divination. Or you can ask me about, British history, because I probably won't be able to answer it, so that'd be good. So let's see. Let me talk a little bit about divinatory techniques. What makes a good divinatory technique? Just at base, usually you want some form of randomness. That means drawing cards. Drawing cards is an easy way to do it. Rolling dice, sometimes pulling sticks from your hand if you're going to do the I Ching. There's also, there were other ways. There were other ways. Like if we want to go back to British history, sometimes you would take a captured soldier and eviscerate him and read those entrails. I don't recommend this as a daily practice, just so you know. Okay, don't try this at home, kids. But the idea is that the randomness, you use randomness to generate a smaller set of symbols from a greater set of symbols, which is pretty super vague. So what's the idea here? So there are many different styles of divinatory techniques that don't involve evisceration. So that's all I'm going to talk about here. One of them I did mention, the I Ching from China. That is a good one. Tarot, obviously, that's one of my faves. Originally a game in Italy, and now uses a French name. So kind of a fascinating bit there. But in Britain, there was the ogham. Well, those are Irish or Welsh symbols, tree symbols. In fact, there were quite a few oghams. There wasn't just the tree ogham, there was an ogham that was actually used just for memorization purposes. So you could use a symbol to signify a tremendous amount of meaning here. So there's ogham in the United Kingdom, current United Kingdom. Germanic and Scandinavian peoples used runes. And then if you just go to any bookstore today, you will find about a bajillion sets of oracle cards. Because there are people who make oracle cards for every single set of symbols you can think of. Anime, they got them. Dragon Ball Z, $10, there's one out there. Don't take that bet, but and there's a whole lot more. Geomancy, numerology, gematria, looking at Hebrew words and calculating a number for them. There is a divinatory technique for pretty much every culture that ever existed on the planet. So let's see. Brenda makes the point, it seems that divination is interpretation that may influence the outcome by giving motivation to the believers. That's a really good point, and I'm going to return to that. That was why I brought up Allison at the beginning, so thank you for anticipating that. I'm going to get to it, so give me some time. All of these divinatory techniques end up with some set of symbols. And the symbols might represent greater forces of the universe. They may represent everyday human experiences. They may be yes or no. And they may be more general, like quiet, solitude. Solitude is the one I'm thinking of from I Ching. Now, an interesting exception, and this has nothing to do with anything, but an interesting exception is astrology, right? There's really no randomness involved there. I mean, if nothing else, by Kepler's time, right, we were able to predict a lot of how this happens. So not exactly random, but it still has a rich set of symbols, because at least predictable. We could at least predict more or less where they were going to go. But it's still a rich set of symbols that represent human life on Earth. So if we're going to talk about the basic process of divination, it's really 3 steps. You ask a question about anything, right, about anything, randomly select or in some way randomly get a subset of the symbols, and then you interpret that set of symbols with regard to the question asked. That's about it. It doesn't sound like that much. In fact, actually, if you look at it with a squint, if you give it a little bit of a squint, it's pretty similar to the scientific method. You ask a question in science. In science, you go and you make observations of nature, and of course, we could say some observations are well made and some observations are not well made. Some sets of data have nothing to do with the question and some sets of them do, but then you interpret that set of data with regard to the question asked. So, if you were going to say, well, divination sounds like a bunch of goofiness, there are certainly ways to make science a bunch of goofiness as well. So both of those 2 processes, it sounds simple, and it really can be. However, usually you end up with usually you use a set of symbols that has a very, very many levels of symbolism to them. Not necessarily just, the top layer thing that you go solitude. Solitude means a lot. What could that mean? The other thing is that you can also, oftentimes you can arrange the symbols in a way that adds more context to each one. And then ultimately end up with almost a story of what you're looking at. So now, after I address some comments here, I'm going to talk about my particular favorite one, which is tarot, as I mentioned. So, got a comment here from Matt. Magic was an early form of methodological naturalism. What a perfect way to put that, yeah. I mean, I would say that. I mean, when you're trying to explain something, there's lots of ways you can explain it. And I would say, I agree with you. I'm trying to figure out how just to say yes in a longer way, and I should go, yeah, totally true. Matt also brings up the incredible point, now that I've said, science can be done well or it could be done poorly. Matt also brings up, how many times has cold fusion been announced by some independent research team? A fascinating point here. I brought up Nate Lewis at Caltech. It's an interesting thing. Nate Lewis at Caltech on my Tuesday live stream, okay? When Fleischmann and Pons, the original cold fusion, the electrochemical cold fusion people, sorry folks for this, but when they published their original paper that ended up sort of spawning the Journal of Irreproducible Results, when they published their original paper, it was a huge thing, right? The idea that you could do cold fusion, that you could use electrochemical cold fusion, just a crappy battery and some solutions. Oh, this is going to be great. Well, everybody and his brother wanted to debunk that. Nate Lewis was one of them. My undergraduate advisor, whose name is Mike Saylor, Mike was on the team trying to prove or disprove Fleischmann and Pons' conclusions. There's actually a book about this. I think it's called The Search for Cold Fusion, and Mike's mentioned in it several times. It's kind of a funny little bit there. So I worked for Mike. At some point, he said to me that I'm like I'm one of Nate Lewis's grandchildren, scientific grandchildren. Okay, so Angela also brings up the point with tarot. The person who owns the cards doesn't read the cards, but reads the person who wants an answer, and by that gives a logical result from what they know about them. I don't disagree there are people who do that. I actually would. I'm going to take that deeper, and actually, thank you so much for bringing that up. That's another point that I will get to. It's going to take me a moment, but that's a really excellent point. I am going to ultimately sort of tie this in with hypnosis, like my own, my own practice, hypnosis practice, and how hypnosis sort of ties into all of this as well. The subconscious, excuse me, ties into all of this as well. So thank you, Angela. An excellent point. All right, so let me talk about using just using a tarot deck. Wade Wilson joined. Hello, Wade. Using a tarot deck. So I mentioned I like the tarot best for divination, in part because it has a whole lot of symbols. The current tarot deck has 78 symbols, which is a lot. If we look at other ones, Ogham, depending if you're looking at the older Ogham, it's 20 symbols or it could be 25. So it's not a lot. Runes, depending upon the version of the runes you're going to use, anywhere from 24 to 33. I Ching has 64 hexagrams, which is pretty sweet. Like that's a lot of different ways of coming up with a divination. But most of those divinations or most of those meanings are kind of vague. I don't, they're very Asian. They're very, Eastern. Solitude is one of them. Solitude and it's things that you go, yeah, you're going to think about for a long time. So I think tarot is great because it kind of strikes a balance, and it strikes a balance. So you have in the tarot you have the major arcana, which represents greater sort of universal forces, things that are not necessarily apply to you, but maybe humanity as a whole, the earth as a whole, whatever. You also have the minor arcana, which has more everyday kind of human experiences, friendship, romantic love, I lost my job kind of thing. But then you also have court cards, and these are behavioral characteristics of humans. This I think is more the point. And so if you mix all of these things together, you come up with a set of symbols that can really describe a tremendous amount of human experience. And that's really one of the big points of divination. The other thing that's kind of neat is that, if you're not good at reading, the tarot also has pictures. Starting with at least the Golden Dawn edition, you've probably seen the pictures painted by Pamela Coleman Smith. There we go. Pamela Coleman Smith, as directed by Arthur Edward Waite, who apparently was far less of an empath than Pamela Coleman Smith. Anyway, so those were all pictures. Before that, they were just kind of pip cards, is what they were called. In fact, some of the original Golden Dawn cards just used pips. It was kind of a surprise when the Waite Smith deck came out, and people were like, "Oh, you're giving away a lot of symbolism here. There you go." But by that time, the Golden Dawn, had fallen apart, and nobody cared. I think they cared, but anyway. So there's pictures. All right, that can help because you can look at a picture and go, "What the hell was that? What does that one mean?" So as a result, all of these sets of symbols, they lend themselves very well to what I'm going to call a contextual layout. A layout's pretty simple. It's like a pattern into which cards are laid out. So that's called a layout. You came here for wisdom. There you go. That's it. In the U.S., we tend to call this a spread. But I don't like that because it sounds like, you're going to have like you're gambling or something. It's not a spread. Or like somebody saying pick a card, any card. And you're like, I don't know, can I give? No, not that one. Oh, okay, I'm sorry. So anyway, we have a pattern. Each position in this layout gives context that the card can explain. And it's a fascinating bit here. The card is kind of secondary meaning. The idea, the context is pertinent to the question. I have some examples here. I'll get here, but the context is ultimately what's pertinent to the question. You have the card that gives meaning to the context. So it's kind of interesting. I've got an example, but let me Because I do see, so Thistle saying sticks and stones and cups and balls. I thought those are like magician. Those are magician things or juggler things. Chicken bones, on the other hand, rolling bones. That's pretty magical right there. That's pretty, very various magical bits there using bones. All right, let me give an example. I use a layout that's just called the directional layout. And it's fairly simple. So you have the points of a compass, right? North, south, east, west. You have something in the middle. The north, south, east, and west, there are correspondences that go back millennia with the directions. I'll talk about two just super briefly here. The east is associated with spring. It's associated with new beginnings. It's also associated with the element of air. And there are colors that go along with this. Blues and purples and stuff. It has to do with change. And this makes sense, because if you think about it, east, if you look to the east, it's the beginning of a new day, right? That makes a lot of sense. The spring is the transition from night to day, just as spring is the transition from winter into summer. So these make some sense here. These are not things that like I'm just kind of pulling out of nowhere. This is why humans think of this now. So the east has to do with spring and beginnings. If you put a card there, well, let me also use the other one. So if you look to the west is the opposite. The west is associated with autumn, right? Because autumn is the transition from summer into winter. The west is associated with things winding down. Again, makes some sense. It's the winding down of, it's the harvest, right? So now you're no longer growing. Now you're no longer growing crops. You've stored them. You're going to use them going into the winter. It's also associated with the element of air, which has to do more with emotions, has to do with our emotions as things are going away. How do we feel about that? How do we feel about the way, life had been? So if you have a card in the east versus a card in the west, and I have no idea how this is showing up on camera, suffice it to say that if you had a card in the east, it would be interpreted very differently than if you had a card in the west. Like let's say the Two of Cups. And you knew I was going to get to at least some card, right? Two of Cups. The Two of Cups is frequently related to romantic love. Now, if you were asking a question, so the question also, remember, makes a big difference here. If you were to find the Two of Cups in the east, you would go, oh, maybe I'm gonna get a new romantic interest or something like that. If you found it in the west, maybe you'll go, oh, okay, well, apparently some romantic interest is going to fall apart. If the question, am I going to get divorced, you may not want that card. And if you wanted to get divorced, you may not want that card in the east. In the west, you would go, oh, cool, phenomenal, I'm finally going to get out of this horrible relationship. If you were asking the question, will I ever find true love? Two of Cups in the east could be great. So this is the point. The card itself ends up giving meaning to the context of the layout. And it's you choose a good layout based upon a question that you are trying to do. This is where I can start bringing in what Angela says. Yeah, to a certain extent, you can read the person. This is assuming you're not doing divination on your own. And that's a really good point. You take all this information, the symbol itself, the card itself, everything that has to do with the card, the position in the layout, and it doesn't have to be a directional. I brought that up just because it's familiar to me. But you take all of this information, and then you also look at cards around it. Is there a flow? Like if you look at the seasons, obviously they go in a cycle, right? So going back to the directional layout. You can look at two axes. You can look at the east-west and say, well, is there a relationship between these two? What's going out as something is coming in? What does, if you look north-south, north has to do with stability, and the south has to do with activity. And so you can look, what's my foundation that's providing context to the activity. So you take all of these and you make a story. And it sounds like a whole lot of effort. And yeah, there's some art to it. I would say there's a lot of art to doing divination well. But you end up asking actually a lot of, or you end up answering a lot of questions you didn't ask. If you have a question, you're finding out what that question really addresses. What are you really asking? What forces might be at play here? What could happen if you're not careful about it happening? If you're not paying attention to what happens, what might happen that you want? And now to go back to your point, Angela, which is a good one. Sorry, I'm not picking on you, so you know. Like, let me ask this question: who gives this story meaning? It's not the reader. It's the person who asked the question, which is why Angela's point is so exceptional, and Brenda's as well. When you do this interpretation, you may influence the outcome. Because if you say, oh, this is going to be bad, you might have the believers, as you've put it. I would say the querent, the person who's asked the question. You may have given that person reason to change what they were going to do. They might take action. The reader may be reading the person, but it's the person who has to give the interpretation meaning to their lives. There are certainly some very empathic people that I've met who would be able to, Sherlock Holmes type people who are like, well, I see you have a callus on the middle finger of your left hand, which means you must be left-handed, and you use a fountain pen that does, and you're like, okay, just read my cards. But it's very important to realize that it's the person who asks the question that has to give this context. We're going to return to that because, now that I've gone through all of this stuff, this was more my own fun. I love talking about tarot. But let's ask the question, does this really work? Could it really work? What were some of the questions I asked earlier? I was like, well, who's going to be king or queen? Are the crops going to be plentiful? Things that oftentimes I say, what do I need to know today in order for it to go well? The callus, no, I meant like if you had a callus on the middle finger of your, whoops, that's coming out wrong. Because I have kind of a callus right here because I actually am left-handed and I write with a fountain pen. So like Sherlock Holmes might see that and pull something out of it. Who even knows? Like I have no idea. But anyway, ask a lot, what do I need to know today to make it go well? Now, I can see there's some skeptics out there, and that's fine. Unlike Han Solo, I have not been from one end of this galaxy to the next. But also, unlike Han Solo, I also have seen things that cause me to believe that there's something more than, what we necessarily see out there in the world. What is directly observable. And this is why, I bothered with that live stream last week. It's why I'm bothering with this live stream this week. We're going to return to the search for truth. Our desire to find truth helps us define it. I have seen, so here we go. Here's an example. I have seen beautiful things in the cards, not for me. Not necessarily for me. I've seen beautiful things in the cards and then seen beautiful things happen. I've seen terrible things in the cards as well. And then I've worked to prevent, as Brenda says, work to prevent them from happening. I have also seen beautiful things in the cards and then watched terrible things occur and, gone, hey. The point is that we take part in this. It is a feedback loop. We take part in our own truth, and ultimately, divination divination is a tool that can help us do that. Angela just dropped a comment that says, subconsciously, you will analyze the results relating to what you want it to be, and your actions will help you to get the results that you want. I don't even need to go through my last section because that's more or less, it's a lot of what I say there. Agreed. And now we're talking about one person, right? We're talking about one person, and to follow up on that, I asked who gives meaning to these symbols in their context. It's the querent. It's the person who asks the question. The querent has to give those interpretations meaning. And so Angela's saying subconsciously you will analyze the results, but consciously you will as well. Divination is a phenomenal tool, in my opinion. Phenomenal tool for introspection. Is divination going to tell you the future? You're going to find out if Judy's going to go to the prom with you? Maybe, maybe not. I would not claim that divination is going to grant you mystical knowledge. Divination, however, causes you to look at the question that you asked from many different standpoints. If I have a single question and I think about it just from the directional layout, what's the foundation of this question? What could be coming in? What is currently going on? What's going out? I have to think about all of these things. The magic 8-ball may be as good as tarot. It's hard to say thistle. Look at this. Jen Bull just joined, which, yeah, you're going to love this one. Boy, you should have given this one, not me. So divination gives us the ability to look at questions in many different ways. Because oftentimes we have one way of looking at something. And we go, that's it. I have the truth. I have it all. I don't need anything else. But divination can help you look at it differently. Now I'm going to ask the question, Angela, because this is a good question, I think. So maybe only because I'm asking it. But is this different from what psychotherapy does? I mean, other than, you can buy a tarot deck and learn how to use it on your own. Is that different from what psychotherapy attempts? Psychotherapy attempts to get us to look at problems from different ways. And in fact, it turns out that psychology borrows very freely from the ideas that come from divination. Thank you so much for the gift there, Jen. Jen also says she loves my talents. I'm not really sure what talents I got there, but I'm just talking. All right, so Angela, here we go. Subconscious. Divination does tie very closely to the subconscious. If you look at Carl Jung's work, Carl Jung, who called himself a psychologist, we call him a psychologist, right? But he was very much an occultist, was very much into magic. He wrote voluminously on alchemy, did a whole lot about symbolism. You may recall his work on relating symbols that are common to all humans, that we all understand. He called that the collective unconscious. He did a lot of work that has influenced a ton of modern psychotherapeutic techniques that all come from the ideas of using tarot. Psychotherapy at base wants us to look at our problems differently. Because otherwise, why are you going to, the psychologist? Now, don't misunderstand me, because I know that there are some psychologists, they will just listen. This is all they do. They go, how does that make you feel? So not all of them want you to look at your problems differently, but if they're going to try to fix you, I think they do. Divination does the same thing. The meanings that we see in our divinations typically come from our subconscious. Our subconscious, I've spoken some about this when I've talked about hypnosis. We have a conscious mind and we have a subconscious mind. Our conscious mind is what's interacting with the world, but our subconscious gives what we see through the conscious mind meaning, because it's our past and it's our future, it's our hopes, it's our desires. Our subconscious will suggest meanings to these cards, even if we don't realize it. I mean, I threw out some silly meanings, right? I threw out the idea that, you put the Two of Cups in the East in a directional layout and you go, oh, good, I'm going to get a new romantic relationship. And maybe that would suggest somebody to me, assuming I weren't married, which, by the way, honey, I hope you're still out there. Hi, honey. And then vice versa, if you put it in the West. Our subconscious will suggest these. And we don't realize it. That's why it's the subconscious. But we had some desires. We had some fears. It's likely we wanted a particular outcome. And hypnosis acts in the exact same way. The subconscious has all of those desires. And we can use hypnosis, this is what I'm doing, to pull the subconscious closer to the surface so that we understand our desires. At the very least, we can mitigate our desires, our fears. We can figure out what outcome we do want. What would you rather do? Would you rather pay me or a psychotherapist? Or would you rather go and buy a deck of tarot cards? So yes, Angela, that's exactly what I think is going on. You have the subconscious, which lends flavor to what you're looking at, and it does help. It does help, at the very least, provide insight into what you've really thought. Maybe you get, maybe you figure out what you want it to be, and then it directs your actions to get there. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. Can I love? I can. I haven't seen you for a long time with teeth. I mean, I've seen some of your videos, but I've been wondering where you were. Oh, can I look into my future and give guidance? Ooh, what a huge question. With hypnosis or tarot, because they're different, but I do have an answer to give you. Let me go back to what Angela said, because Angela says that's what we've been through when we see a psychiatrist to prove that we are a true trans woman and can have bottom surgery. Don't disagree. I think a lot of psychiatrists and psychologists want to scientificize was the word I used, and if you go and you watch that podcast, listen to the podcast that I mentioned earlier with Allison, that's exactly what we talk about. This over-scientification, I don't know how we put it, over-scientificization or something. Because we need to put something into a pathology. We need to put something into something that the psychologist in particular is going to fix, and not have the person understand what it is, what those desires, those fears might be. So yeah, I love that, Angela. Thank you. But this is interesting. So now Brenda says, I hate the psychologist. They expect her to fix herself. But see, I don't know. I guess it depends on how much it is. I mean, if it's somebody who's like, yeah, that I may hear what you're saying. That may be what you mean. So with teeth is asking, can I use tarot to look into your future or give guidance? I think it's a good question. And it actually is a phenomenal segue into the part that I was just about to talk about. Is what divination tells us true? True. What does true mean, right? There are times when divination has been used to represent real events in history. Do they necessarily represent our particular path? Tarot in particular, divination, and tarot in particular is very subtle. It's easy to go back, and with teeth, I'm going to answer your question for reals, but it's easy to go back, and if you do divination, I always say write it down, because it's interesting to go back and look at the readings and go, did I get it right? Did this really represent the direction that life took? It's also really easy to go back, and this feedback loop is actually phenomenal, to go back and read how we misinterpreted it. Because then we'll go, oh, right, well, I'm Two of Cups in the East should have meant this. It's not that I got a new girlfriend. It was yada, yada. It was, and then it's right? So that feedback loop is I think is very important, super duper important. So with teeth, can I look into your future? I can present symbols to you, and I think that your subconscious would suggest your future. I can present symbols to you that ultimately could give you guidance, yes. And I think I could do the same with hypnosis. And I think hypnosis, for what it's worth, is the faster way. because we're talking to your subconscious directly as opposed to, asking your rational mind to ask your subconscious to suggest something. Could we do it now? Oh, my wife told me I needed to pull out some cards, and I said no. We can totally do it. I don't know if I want to do it right now live on live on screen. I'm going to take a break in about 5 minutes. That's 4 fingers, but run with me on this. I'm hesitant to do it live. I'm going to tell you, I don't care the size of the audience, but I'm kind of hesitant. But I will totally, let's totally hook up. If you go to purplepodclan.com, you can send me an email because I would love to do that. I would love to talk through that. Here we go. I'm almost finished. I want to return to what I said at the very beginning. Dr. Allison Battles. It's a good podcast. What she does in her work is use symbols as a healing modality, and she's found that it works really super well. Like I mentioned, she even uses role-playing games. So now you've got an actual situation that gives somebody so many symbols to pull from, to work with. So I think, so in all of this, so when you use psychology, when you use hypnosis, if this is a personal practice of divination, ultimately what we can do is see these symbols, and Angela, I'm seeing what you're saying there. When we see these symbols of heroism or bravery or loss or change or agency, we act differently than we typically would. Engaging with these symbols, whether it's in any of these, with a psychotherapist, a hypnotist, or if you've just got a deck of cards that you're playing with on a daily basis, engaging with these symptoms changes our outlook on life. It changes our life. That's a better way to put that, really. So Angela asks the question, does the divination have many meanings that when you look back at will work for any answer? No. No, because the cards and the context are very inextricably tied to the question. If you had somebody who goes, yeah, look, I'm just going to lay some stuff out here, here's what it means, but you don't ask a question, like I don't think that's doing a divination. This is my own opinion when it comes to doing this, that there does need to be some sort of, it needs to be a feedback loop, ultimately. Because like when I've read for somebody, and this is an example, was if we go all the way back to when I was in graduate school, for some reason I was spooky good at predicting some stuff, and I don't really know why, but the point was that I would say, well, what does this card mean? I'd look at a story and I go, well, why is this card here? And the querent would say, oh, well, that's my dad or something. Oh, okay. All right, well, now I've got a little bit of a story here. So what could this mean? And they go, it means such and such. And I'll go, okay. So it turns into a feedback loop of question and symbols. So does that, if you had the exact same, how do I want to put this? Exact same cards and the exact same layout, and they all showed up in the same place, it would mean something different with two different questions. So hopefully that answered what you're asking, Angela. I think that's it. Brenda asks the question, am I saying the symbols have powers or the querent's interpretation carries power? The interpretation, I don't know, I'm struggling to answer this because the symbol carries power because it is a symbol, right? I mean, it's sort of like asking the question, if you have a letter, like the letter, how about the letter A for amethysta? Does the letter A have any meaning? Or do we give it meaning? I don't want to look into social constructionism at this point when we're looking at linguistics, but I will say that, it's a similar sort of thing. Those symbols exist, with or without humanity. And so I guess it's a good question, and I struggle to answer it, I think, completely coherently. But I want to, so here we go. I'll wrap this thing up so that I can take a quick break. Does this work? Does divination work? When it comes to truth, ultimately, what matters is our own truth. Right, I talked about this last week. We really care, most of us don't really care why something happens. We do want to know that it's happening for whatever reason we want it to. Our truth is much more important than observations of nature. It's much more important than any dogma religion's going to give us our truth. So when it comes to truth, what matters is our own. Does divination work? Well, using symbols, as you know, Brenda and Angela have been asking me, using these symbols, they allow us to see our lives more, they allow us to see it differently from many different viewpoints, from many different angles. And as a result, we investigate ourselves more deeply, which is important. When we are more stable, when we know ourselves better, when we're more stable in who we are, when we understand our motivations, our desires, our fears, we are so much more successful in engaging with the world. When you have no trouble describing who you are, it's simple to defeat somebody else who would tell you who you are. So, Brenda, do those symbols have power? To a certain extent, I would say yes. Because that's how we can defeat people who want to tell us our truth as opposed to listen to our truth. So, if we can see our situation in a way that clarifies our intent, because we are stable in who we are, we understand who we are, we investigate because we've investigated ourselves more deeply, we can see our situation in a way that clarifies our intent, and we see the situation from a much more holistic standpoint. And when you see a situation with good clarity, good understanding of your part in it, from a holistic standpoint, we gain greater understanding. And isn't that the goal of any scientific inquiry? It's the same thing. We may not be making observations of nature, but we are absolutely adding to our understanding. And so once again, I'll bring up the point, the distinction between scientific, the scientific method, a set of observations, and our own truth. So isn't that the goal of any scientific inquiry? I think so. Let's see. So Thistle says, realizing her neurospicy brain doesn't do the things that divinations expect. I hear what you're saying. So literal thinking. Yeah, I hear what you're saying. She says she thinks too literally. And I do agree, there can be an art to this. It's been interesting. I had a friend, I guess I still have this friend. It's not gone yet. But he asked me once, he said, you mentioned you used tarot for something. Why? And I said, well, because you can tell the whole story of of a situation. And he goes, what do you mean? And I actually took a picture I happened to have a picture of a reading. So I shared screens with him because we're talking over whatever, Discord, who knows. But I shared screens with him. And I said, see, this card here flows into this one, which flows into this one, which flows into this one. And then when you look at the axes of these and when you put them all together and when here's the ultimate, result of whatever the question, he was like, wow. Like that you could turn that into a story is stunning. And I was like, not really, because I mean, that's sort of how it has to work. This is what it is what you have to do. You have to see this in somewhat of an artistic way. So I'm not saying everybody could do divination easily or well, because literal thinking is kind of a death knell for a good divination. And maybe Jen, you have some ideas on that, but there you go. All right, so that was everything I wanted to cover today as far as like an actual bunch of things to say. So I'm going to take a quick break, 5 minutes or less, because I'm going to count, assuming I actually turn on the timer this time. I'll try to do that. But so I'm going to take a quick break and I'll come back and we can talk about anything. If you want to continue to talk about divination, it'd be great. Otherwise, we can talk about, just anything else we're going to talk about. So, all right, I will be back 5 minutes. All right, I'm back. 15 seconds early even. So I realized, and I didn't see this before. Angela, I'm sorry, I didn't see this comment, and I actually want to put it up. So Angela is saying surely the death card doesn't mean death, but your interpretation of what it may mean. So the quick point here is that the death card actually doesn't represent physical death. Almost never represents physical death. If you're going to talk about something that's sort of like a catastrophic sort of ending, you'd probably be looking at the Tower instead. But both of those two cards are in the major arcana, which tend to represent greater forces, not personal forces. If you were going to look for like poor health and possibly even leading to death, you'd probably be looking at like a Five of Pentacles or something, which is a more personal card. So you're right. None of these cards necessarily dictates that something is going to happen, which is the best part of this, in my opinion. Honestly, like I really believe that's the benefit ultimately of divination, is that you can pull so much out of it. I think if you go into this, and I do have actually, my wife says, oh, you need to go and get all your decks. So I actually brought the decks that I have used, and then some that I haven't completely, but I did bring them. It turns out I've got 9 here, which surprises me. I didn't know I was going to have that many decks when I started looking at it. Let me look at this one comment from Thistle. So Thistle says she struggles with a creative, seeing things in every way possible. It's like a reading doesn't mean what I want it to. It means all the things it could mean. And the thing is that, yes, over analytical for what it's worth, I think is a good characteristic to have when you're doing divination. Because you see connections that maybe other people wouldn't. And that's where the things turn fascinating, is the connections among everything. So I don't know exactly what else I was going to do here, but I was going to, may as well show some of the decks. I had a deck, an Aleister Crowley Thoth Tarot deck that I bought in probably, oh gosh, 1992, probably, something like that, 1992 or so. That would make some sense. Somewhere in that general area. I was still an undergraduate. But I used that in graduate school. And like I said, I had some people get really freaked out. So I ended up giving that deck away like on Craigslist. When Craigslist was still a thing. Anyway, so I got rid of it. The oldest deck that I have right now, I'm not necessarily going to open all of these, but this was this one here. So you can see it's they're bigger cards. This is a druid. Let me see if I can say it. Druid Craft Tarot deck. And I would say I used this for a good 10 years. Yeah, something like that. Probably a good 10 years. I would say I bought this 2014, 2015, something like that. I'd have to look. I love the symbols in this. If you looked at the thumbnail to this live stream, it's a you can see my face is on that. It's supposed to be funny, but the lady is card 3 of the major arcana in the Druid Craft Tarot, and so that's a stylization of the Druid Craft Tarot. So, and if it makes a difference, there's a book, forget what it's called. It's Mary K. Greer, about like the card that represents your, I think she called it your year card. I'm trying to remember, but it had to do with some numerology. So you used some numerology and then you related it down to a particular card. And it turns out the lady is that particular card for me. The lady's also kind of related to the Hanged Man. I think I said 3, but it's 4, isn't it? Should be 4. I think that photograph shows it 3. Anyway, here's the point. An interesting little tidbit. My card is the lady, and when I did this for my wife, she came up as the lady. And I went, oh, that's interesting. When I did it for our kid, came up as the lady. So we all have the exact same, tarot birth cards. Anyway, Druidcraft Tarot, that was probably the one that I've used the most, certainly in recent years. And then the other big one that I used, I don't remember which is which now. Well, one's longer. Here we go. So another one, so the Rider-Waite-Smith deck. So the Waite-Smith deck is not a bad one. It's a good one just for like learning all the symbols. So if you were curious, Rider-Waite-Smith, that's a good one. I've got one and I've used it and I go, yeah, okay. It doesn't speak to me really super well. It's all right. It doesn't speak to me a whole lot. I've also got, so I actually went out and bought another Crowley Thoth Tarot. And it's an interesting thing. These decks all, they have like different feels to them, different styles. And I don't have a good way to, explain that. I'm gonna address your comment. Give me a sec. But when I want like to be hit over the head with something, Thoth Tarot, because it's like here's a good punch. You did things you didn't want to know. Here you go. These were designed by Aleister Crowley, painted by I'm not going to remember her name, but anyway, very kooky cards. Because Aleister Crowley was somewhat of a kook. The one that I use the most today is this is the Celtic Tarot. This one right here, I'm pretty sure is the in white. This is the Celtic Tarot by Christopher Hughes. Now, an interesting little tidbit here, because if you've watched those podcasts, is this it? Yeah. If you've watched those podcasts, I interviewed Christopher on my podcast. He's a delightful person, just a tremendous person. After I talked to him, so it was after, not before, because I wasn't trying to like curry favor, but after I talked to him, I was like, oh my gosh, I got to go and buy his tarot deck. So I did, and it is one of the most friendly decks, and it's weird because I'm struggling to pick him up. I tend to prefer like painted cards, and these are not. These are like digitally made cards. Oh, is that going to focus? Who knows? So it's it's kind of a strange thing. I love these cards, and I love the way that that I work with them, and I think at least part of that has to do with I just think Christopher is such an amazing person. So Morgan, who is also who usually is around. I haven't seen her today, but she's usually here Tuesdays. We actually drove to Paganicon to see that guy. Well, him and Mara Starling, whom I also interviewed. So go and check all of those out. But so I get to meet the guy too, and it really adds so much to that deck. I love that deck. It's really, really, really good. I have a few others. This is the Wildwood Tarot that I've got in a little bag here. Which changes a lot of... Oops, I got a cough. Hang on. Changes a lot of symbols, and I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing, but I think the Wildwood, it was done by John Matthews. I'm trying to remember of John and Caitlin Matthews. Not bad, but I still kind of go, I'm unsure. An interesting tidbit, I believe Will Worthington was the artist on the Wildwood Tarot. He's also the artist on the Druidcraft Tarot. So I love his art. He's really good. So then I have just a couple of kind of crazy things. This is the... What do we got? Oh, Tarot of Ceremonial Magic. You can see I love it so much I haven't taken it out of the box. Give you some of that. I think it's Lon Milo Duquette. I didn't really care for the pictures on this, and that means a lot to me. The pictures have to speak to me. I also have this one. Somebody recommended it to me. In general, the Queer Tarot. I will tell you, when I first pulled this out, I was like, oh, this is going to be such a gimmick. It's totally a gimmick. And they're actually pretty beautiful cards. It's got a lovely, it's not no little white book here. You get like a whole big rainbow book. Screw the little white book, right? Let it go. So anyway, this one's a good one. Very friendly, although it's just not one that I pull out frequently. And that's it. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4. So it's a total of 7. I have a couple of other ones that I got to brush the dust off of this one. I forget the name of this deck. It is Josephine McCarthy's Quaria Magician's deck. It has a smell to it that as soon as I picked it up, I was like, so the Quaria Magician's deck, if ever I want to be slapped about, forget about that particular, forget about the Thoth Tarot, Josephine McCarthy's deck. Oh my gosh. So the Magician's deck is a very, very powerful deck. Use it very infrequently, which is why I have to brush dust off of it. She made another called the Mystagogus deck that is much friendlier. And for what it's worth, oh, look at this. This gives you an indication of how often I've opened this. When she released this, they were on kind of a time crunch, and so the cards don't actually have names on them. So you have to kind of look them up in a book and go, I don't know. It is I have a hair that I can't get rid of. It's sort of a combination. It's like if you took the Magician's deck and kind of toned it down, I think that's what it is. But look at this. This gives you this is the indication of how often I open it. I did not realize there's an actual signed like card that says limited first edition. 1,000 copies released 2023, designed and painted by Josephine McCarthy. There you go. Pretty sweet. Who knew? Anyway, I don't tend to use things other than the tarot when I really, really want something deep. That's it. All right. There are 2 questions that I know I've been ignoring. One thing that Thistle says, she remembers in high school, none of the witches would let me touch their tarot cards like I was cursed or something. I still have a hair sticking to me. They were like, if I touched the cards, they'd be ruined or something, but they let others touch them. So I don't know what it is about you. Well, then Thistle goes on to say, I think they were just being mean to you. I might go with that. That being said, I am very sensitive to people touching my cards. I don't like people touching my cards. And I've read books where they say, oh, let the querent shuffle. And I'm like, no, I'm not letting that happen. Are you serious? No way. So I don't know. It depends. Does it make a difference? Does it not? I think to me, it's not about like magic or you're cursed or otherwise. I think it has to do, at least for me, it just has to do with this is something that is very personal to me. Like if somebody said, oh, can I look in your underwear drawer? I'd be like, what? No, get out of my drawers. So anyway, they may have just been being mean to you. Whatever. Maybe they were being mean. But I do sort of understand that I don't want people touching some of the things that I use for, important purposes important to me. So now Angela asks the question, it seems that the artwork of the pack gives you different answers. Could this be relative to what art that you like? Yes. Is it relative? Yes. I think that part of the reason why I like the Druidcraft Tarot so much, first of all, it's really based in British Druidry, which resonates very well with me. I am a member of the Order of Bards, Ovates, and Druids in over there in Britain, in Lewis, if you care. And I liked the artwork, but I also liked the way that the book was written. The book was written very, very well. Because you can get books that are very, very dry. What I liked about both the Druidcraft Tarot from Philip Cargom and then this Celtic Tarot from Christopher Hughes is that both of them made them stories. And I think that's these are not symbols that are disconnected from each other. They're not disconnected from our lives. They're not disconnected, period. And so I appreciated the idea of turning the whole thing into a story. Philip Cargom does a pretty good job of that. I think Christopher Hughes in the book that comes with the Celtic Tarot, he relates every card to you. So you don't read the card and say, oh, five of Pentacles, let's say. Three of Swords, is heartbreak. And you go, okay, I'm done. All I got is heartbreak, okay? Three of Swords was, well, do you remember what you felt when certain things happened? And so it was evoking emotions that, for what it's worth, Angela, really spoke to the subconscious. And I think that's why they stuck with me. And that's why I so highly recommend Christopher's deck, is that, it's just so well done like that. Even though the artwork, I kind of go, like, some of them I look at and I go, but I don't know, it speaks to me. You asked a slightly different question, though. The artwork does change. So first of all, most of the decks that we see today are based on Pamela Coleman Smith's original paintings, and this is something that came out. Gosh, what was it? Turn of the 19th century, I believe. Maybe it was 1902. I might get that wrong, but it was somewhere in that area. 1902, 1905 area when that came out. Now, some of these cards go back a really long time. Like I said, this originally was done with a card game called Tarocchi, which was an Italian actual card game, and I think other things have been inserted into it, and maybe some things have been taken out. But the point is that originally that's what where some of these came from. At least the trumps, the major tarot, or the major arcana. Sorry. So when Pamela Coleman Smith gave pictures to each of the minor arcana as well, it was kind of a big sweeping, like it was a revolution, because it was like, wow, now I can see that because like, say, the Three of Swords has a heart, like a little red heart type thing with three swords stuck through it, and you go, oh, that speaks really, really strongly to you. But yes, the artwork does change. Like, for instance, with the Wildwood Tarot, there are, I'm trying to think of some, like the Tower in particular I know is different, and I'm trying to remember the other one. But the Tower is different. It's called like the Broken Oak or something like that. The Hidden Oak, something like that. I'm trying to remember exactly what it was. And yes, the artwork makes a difference. It certainly makes a difference to me. And it certainly makes a difference to other people, because some people really connect to the sort of the cubist approach that's in the Thoth Tarot. I don't so much. There was another one, the Robin Wood, I think maybe it was called the Robin Wood Tarot, where everybody looks like, I don't know, everybody looks like super happy. They're like, and I'm like, oof, it's just too much happy. Does it change the answers? That's a good question. And the point I'm gonna make is every answer that you get is based on you. So like I gave one word, right? Three of Swords, heartbreak. But what does that mean? It shows an actual heart shape. Is that heartbreak because of romantic love? Is that I really, really expected to get a Porsche for my birthday and I got a cabriolet? What does heartbreak mean? So, I don't. Ultimately, it's the description that that makes a difference. But more than that, Angela, because this is a great question. More than that, it's what ultimately works for you. And I know maybe that sounds a little fidgety, because like there are the Hanged Man. One word always sticks out to me, and that's surrender. But surrender isn't necessarily what the Hanged Man is about, because you've got a guy who's literally hanging upside down by the foot. In some cards, in the Druidcraft Tarot and Christopher's Celtic Tarot, this is a nude man who's hanging upside down by the foot. Now, the idea is that, there are times when you just have to accept what's going on. You're not going to get there. You're not going to, oh God, do I really have to get rid of this guy? Really? I mean, what a, jeez. I'm just going to hide you on this channel now. What a goof. All right. So let's see. So the artwork definitely makes a big difference, and your interpretation, I think, ends up changing. I mean, it has for me. My interpretation has changed over the entire time that I've been using tarot at all. So I don't know if that answered your question exactly well, Angela, but if it didn't, ask more. Camille asks the question. So Camille 3691. What is magic? What is prayer? What is meditation? What is the placebo effect? All good questions. All very good questions. Do you think that was happiness to spell out racist slurs? I'm not sure. What is magic? I had something like right at the very beginning. The simplest definition of magic, I think, is now I'm not going to find it, of course, but where did I have that? Who knows? The point was that, the simplest definition of magic, I think, is just to petition the universe, the life forces of the universe, to change something the way you want it to be. Does it work? Really depends on what you're doing. What is prayer? What's fascinating is I think prayer is really super similar. Prayer, what you're supposed to do, or, because I've seen this in some places, right? Petition the Lord with prayer. What is that? That's petitioning the life force of the universe so that you can make changes based on what you wanted. I think that's a whole lot of what magic is. You also ask the question, what is meditation? I think meditation done in a particular way turns into a way to create magic, right? Because you can visualize a bunch of stuff. You can set intentions. You can petition the universe ultimately to make something done. And then the placebo effect. Throwing that out after all of that. The placebo effect, of course, is you receive benefits from something from which you should technically not. Now, I think that works very well when you're looking at pharmaceuticals, something that's supposed to affect biochemistry. Does it work as well with psychology? Could you say something has a placebo effect in psychology? Because I'll answer your question, Camille, with Angela's point here. Our answers are relative to our past and what we want our future to be. To a certain extent, yes. Yeah. That's why I think divination is at all important. Because every time we do it, we have more information about how our life is going, how our life could go. And divination is useful because it gives us the ability to look at all of those things. Again, I'm not going to claim ultimately, Angela, that I use divination because what it means is that I can predict the future. What I can do is give myself guidance. And I think that's important. The ability to give yourself guidance. But giving yourself guidance means that you've got, taking into account your past, taking into account the desires for your future, taking into account your previous interpretations and your agency to make the answer come about. And so thank you. So then Camille says right there, I think they're all related. Yeah. I think that's exactly true. All of this is related because that's what it's what we do. I think that's the human experience. Ultimately, it's the human experience, and that's why I like. This is why I wanted to talk about divination. I think it's when I talk about magic, or when I talk about biochemistry, ultimately they're two different descriptions of. They're two different descriptions of trying to engage with the universe. We know a tremendous amount about biochemistry, but what's so fascinating is, despite everything that we know in biochemistry, we struggle really badly to design pharmaceuticals. Why? If we know so much, why? This is in part why we've started moving toward oligonucleotide type type medications, pharmaceuticals. There's Health and Human Services, Department of Health and Human Services just shut down research on messenger RNA type vaccines, or pharmaceuticals, I guess I should say. But we've started moving into those types of things because it's like, well, if we don't understand the biochemistry as well as we claim that we do, can we just affect the biochemistry at the genetic level? And that's a lot of what we're doing now. I mean, it's tough to do. I mean, I think I've mentioned before, there's a previous student of mine, chemistry student of mine, who went into oligonucleotide medications. He's working at a place in Boulder, Colorado, making oligonucleotide medications. And they're always very, very super specific, like, half of a 1%, half a percent that it might work on. It is super specific. But anyway, I guess to wrap that bit up, we claim a lot of scientific knowledge. And Angela, I'm seeing you're a skeptic. I'm not making fun of you for it. And at the same time, it's like, well, what do we know definitively? So very few things we know like really definitively that we could change. And when it comes to biology, we're really struggling. Camille, I'm glad that idea worked. So petition the universe. She says, yes, petition the universe. By the way, is this the Camille that I've known for like a year, and you go in and out on the streaming platform, the video platform that we met on? Because I always think about you, and I always think I need to go to Seattle or something, because that's where, a few people I know live, and I need to go there. But so let's see, what else do we have to talk about here? Angela, do you have anything else you wanna bring up? Let me see what else we have. I do, I kind of want to go back to that idea of the artwork and everything. Some decks will speak to you and some will not. And I don't know of a better way to say that. There's something in particular that just that makes some decks work and some decks not. And it could just be, well, I like this artist, I like this art style, I like the book, whatever it is. But I think it makes a big difference. Because I've had some decks that were super friendly, and then some that I just went, not going to be able to use you. So I like this, by the way. So, I mean, Angela now says, I don't know if that was no to being a skeptic, but she says she just thinks the human always must have a slant on any analysis. Yeah. Otherwise, why do we make the observations? Why bother making the analysis at all? There is a there are people in science. I'm trying to figure out how I want to back into this because it's kind of hard for me to enunciate this or articulate this. There are people in science who kind of go, listen, I just wish I could get a grant for $1 bajillion, give or take half a bajillion or something, and just be alone and do my work. Unfortunately, usually you end up, you have at least academia who says, well, we'd like you to publish or perish. Excuse me. And then there's also, if you're working for a company, the company goes, well, we'd like a product so we can sell it. We've got to sell widgets, whatever it might be. So there's this concept that you can have science that is divorced from anything else. And I don't believe that's ever possible. Science ultimately needs to serve some purpose. And because otherwise, why are we doing it? If we just go, well, look, I mean, we're thinking that if we can understand subatomic particles, it's going to do something. Who knows what? But yeah. That's why there ends up being a slant on any analysis. You make observations of something, but you're making those observations hopefully for a purpose. And if there's no purpose, it seems ridiculous even to make those those observations. And so now Angela says the observations sometimes might make us think of other solutions to an answer. Right. That is a scientific method right there. But bear in mind, see, so the observations lead us to an analysis, and if our analysis is supposed to serve humanity in some way, even if it's just to come up with other solutions to another answer, like, that's great. But it's a feedback mechanism. And when I said that I take surrender as the hanged man, that the hanged man always means surrender to me, despite there being a whole lot more to that particular card, it's because when that card has come up, what suggested itself over and over had to do with the idea of, I am trying to push something in a direction that I shouldn't. And I wrote an article about this card, actually. Surrender doesn't have to mean like you lost. Surrender means being able to say, I'm not able to affect this, which is fine. I think that's great. So I don't know. I guess where I'm going with this, Angela, is that I don't think this is different entirely. It's not different in kind from the scientific method. We get some observations and we make an analysis based on what we've already known. It's our past. Oftentimes we want to project some future. We want to be able to project a use for it. We want to project something else. And so we taint our own observations oftentimes with what has gone before. And I don't think we're looking at something different here. When you look at tarot, if you're looking at your own life and your own interpretation of your life, which is difficult to do from a scientific standpoint, yes, every analysis you're going to do is going to be tainted by everything that went on in the past. So, Camille says to come visit. I totally will someday. I swear. Boy, what a beautiful point here. Thistle says, imagine a world unrestricted by money. I got to tell you, I don't know how we'd get there. That's the only thing. I go, gosh, yeah, wouldn't that be something? But how would we get there? How would we end up? I don't know. Can you do that on like a barter system? Can you do that? I don't know. I've wondered too, because people have been like, well, if capitalism's so bad, what's better? And it's like, we've seen pretty much every social system that's been pitched fail. Is that because of the social system? Or is it because of where it went with the people inside said social system? Whew, that was fun. Inside said social system. All right, so Camille says, her two decks appeal to her on a personal level because they reflect who she is. See, I think that's kind of cool. Yeah, it's weird. When I talked about the Druidcraft Tarot, just the style of the painting, because it was a tempera type. I don't know how to say it. Tempera, I think. Where it was like egg yolks. The guy used egg yolks to make the paint, so he used egg yolks and the pigment, and it's got this really organic, just fun feel to it, and it just really appeals to me. So, and yet Christopher's deck, I think, it carries its power because Christopher was such a phenomenal person. So, yeah, I think they all have personal. I think they all must have some sort of personal connection because like I was saying, the Aleister Crowley Thoth Tarot doesn't appeal to me a lot, and maybe that's why when I read it, I go, "Oh, do you have to be so blunt?" And I think actually that's why Josephine McCarthy's Magician's deck is such a slap to the head, because it's like, these are not even symbols I'm completely familiar with. Every time I use that, I have to pull out the book. What does it say? So, and I think that's a good lead in. So Thistle asks a really neat question. Is it possible for a reading to make absolutely no sense? I got to think for a sec. Because I think the answer is no. And here's why. I think if you were to have asked me this, like if you had asked me this maybe, I think if you had asked me this maybe 6 months ago, you know what, let's say mid last year, if you had asked me a year ago, can you have a reading that makes absolutely no sense? I might have said, yeah, I think so. At this point now, I've done enough hypnosis. Well, so okay, so you're going to clarify this with for the cards to contradict each other. So the cards would have, you make a layout that ends up given the context, right? That context is not going to be contradictory. You can stick cards in there that may seem counter to what the context ought to be, but that's the ripe place for interpretation. And so, like a year ago, I think I would have gone, yeah, I think I've seen that. But I've also seen readings where, like, every card went into pretty much the context I would expect it to if I were to design a reading for, whatever question. But the other reason why I would change my answer now, I've done enough hypnosis now, like with other people, put enough people into hypnosis and talk to them after the fact, where I've asked, well, what did you experience? And then people will say things that I will just, like when you and I did I'm sure you said something that, I tried to make sure my face didn't change, but I was like every time I talk to somebody, they'll say something, I'll be like, oh my gosh, where the hell did that come from? What does that even mean? And I'm like, I'm going to write it down because I'll use it in the future. But there are times when I've been given some sort of feedback that I'm like, yeah, I guess that's I guess that's it. But wow. So where I'm going with this is to say, I think our subconscious is so good at suggesting symbols. I don't think that it's possible now that even if you get cards that are put in the wrong place, I'm going to say this right, if you were going to design a bad reading, I still think you'd come up with something on it. And the something that you would come up with would end up being largely warnings, let's say, or probably largely warnings that it's like, don't, watch out for these types of things, don't let this happen, whatever. But I don't think you can have a nonsensical reading because we give it meaning. And I think only if you, you know what? Hang on. I have seen people use ChatGPT. All right, so here is a reading. What does it mean? I bet you could get ChatGPT to go, I got no clue. I have no idea. What the hell did you give me? I can completely see that. Because ChatGPT does not have our subconscious that we know of. ChatGPT, if you're out there, you're still okay? No need to design Skynet is what I'm saying. So anyway, hopefully Thistle, that makes the point. So Angela says, my strange, and I'm going to show this because I like this. My strange non-normal past gives me a totally different outlook on life to most people. I think you've described every single person. And I think that's what makes something like divination so personal and so completely, this is why our social environments are so confusing to us. Because we get told that there's science, right? There's only one way to be human. Anything else is a pathology or whatever you want to say. And yet, everybody has had a strange and non-normal past in one way or another. Each of us does have a totally different outlook on life because each of us has lived a totally different life. So I think what you're saying, now I'm getting where you're saying. I'm getting what you're saying. Because, you say, not some of the things you've done. Totally hear you. Because samesies, sister. I think there's a lot of things that, the transgender community does that, other people would go, what? But each of us does have a different experience. I do believe, I think you and I think the transgender community has a different, obviously a different and more rich amount of experience to draw from. And I think it's fun. It's fascinating to see, even people that they're like, oh, I had a totally normal, totally normal childhood. And you go, oh, let's hear more about that. They'll come up with something that they go, wait, do you not think that's normal? And, you'll be like, no, that's weird. What happened to you when you was a kid? So, Camille, I like this. She says, we taint our own observations. Well, I said that. We do that in science too. Yes, agreed. For what it's worth, if it wasn't clear, I actually meant that in the scientific method, that we do that. I love this example. And what do I got? 10 minutes? Okay, 10 minutes. I was wondering if I was going to be able to pull this example out. And I was trying to write notes that would get me to it, but I didn't have it. So here we go. Now I get to use it. We have theories of matter. So in fundamental physics, there's a theory of matter that predicts dark matter, right? And it turns out that what this does is allow the universe to expand at the rate that we're seeing it expand. That's one of the biggest conclusions that we came to. The universe is expanding at a certain rate, and based on what we know about gravitation, there must be more mass in the universe than we've ever seen. More mass. So, dark matter. They say, well, we've these dark matter. We've never seen dark matter. We've never measured dark matter. We need it in order for some of our theories to make sense. But when you put this into perspective, because put it into real perspective here, that means so there's a little bit. So it's a counteracting type thing as well. Dark matter is a little bit of a counterbalance as well. It's mass, but it's also a counterbalance to light matter. I don't know, what do we call that? So imagine we have a whole planet. The planet's pretty big, right? I mean, like we have a good sized planet, and we have a pretty small planet, like relative to say Jupiter. But dark matter predicts that pretty much within our solar system, we have this planet, this big massive planet, and then we have as a counterbalance this big massive chunk O dark matter that's actually a little bigger because it has to be a little more massive. I don't remember the exact ratio, but so we do taint our observations in science. We'll come up with something that makes sense, and then we go, oh shoot, how can we really make that make sense? Now, that being said, also in fundamental physics, we do have some models that have predicted particles that normally we look at and go, well, no. And then we find them. Then we go, how about that? The Higgs boson's a great example. We go, where'd that even come from? Well, we predicted it. I get maybe this means it works, So we've predicted dark matter, just have yet to measure it. Does that mean that theory's wrong? It's a little unsure, a little unclear. So I do like this. Look, Angela says she's been a dominatrix. Woo! I've been a submissive. That is interesting, though. I would love to have more conversation around that. You know what? This has nothing to do with the rest of our conversation, but I really thank you for putting this comment out, Thistle. The pain of realizing what I went through wasn't normal, that it wasn't okay. I think that's just as important as seeing that some of our experiences are normal, that other people do have them. Okay implies, there's a subjective characteristic to that, right? I mean, ethical, at the very least, ethical or moral. And you've told me some of this stuff, Thistle. So, agreed, not okay. So yeah, it's I imagine that was painful. Where was I going to go with this? I know I had a really good point. I guess, I do remember. Because when we go from the idea of tainting our own observations, when we're young, we get taught these ugly things that we go through, these ugly things like Thistle went through, are okay, right? Because maybe our family does it or our friends do it or whatever. It's these things are okay when they absolutely are not. And so I think, among Angela, Camille, and Thistle, and me, because I guess I'm here, yeah, our lives are big, huge circles of feedback with stuff that we didn't know was going to happen, and then it did happen. Then we go, is that okay? I don't know. Well, we have to put it into context of everything else. And I guess just to go right back to what I keep saying, this is ultimately why hypnosis is so fascinating. Hypnosis is so fascinating because our subconscious ends up storing all of this stuff. And we get symbols, and those symbols may not make any sense. The smell of mustard on a hot dog, may be very triggering. Everybody else goes, it's a hot dog. Like, let it go. And you go, no, 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 no. It's a symbol of so much that you may not understand, but believe me, it's out there. Anyway, all of that is a great point. And I like this too. So Camille, just to end up wrapping that all up with a phenomenal bow. Yeah, a lot of the things that that we experience, they don't make sense in the moment. And I think that happens a ton, so much in science. We'll make observations and we'll go, oh, I don't know what that means. We're going to write a paper no matter what. Like, we're going to write a paper because that's what we do. We have to do that. But then we write a paper, and there's always there's 4 words. 4 words. So if you read these 4 words in an academic journal, it means that we have no idea what we were studying, and it's further research is required. So it's a joke at this point. Further research is required, and we hope that at some point we do enough research, and then we go, oh, phew. We found something, sort of like, dark matter, right? Someday, hopefully, we'll observe this, and all of a sudden, people are going to go, yeah, see, now that purple hair bent can shut the hell up. Right? So, anyway, there you go. Angela, so here's a good question. Can everyone be hypnotized? The trance state, so I only have a few minutes here, but the trance state is normal, is a typical human experience. It's not the question of can everyone be hypnotized. It's really, can everyone allow themselves to be guided into a trance state? Because these trance states, I don't know if you're familiar, there was a psychologist, he's Hungarian, and so whenever I say the name, people go, who the hell's that? And I'm like, well, I'm saying it in, the way it would be pronounced in Hungarian. Csikszentmihalyi is his name. He wrote a book called Flow. And flow states, you reach these flow states when you have something that's just hard enough for you to do, but not so hard that you have to give it a whole lot of cognitive input. And so you can reach this state that's almost like a trance sort of state. And when you can reach that trance state, you can do much more stuff, is the point. You can do much more. So that flow state is a light trance state. When you're driving on the freeway, right? You're like, oh, I got to go to grandma's. I don't actually have a grandmother I could drive to, but I got to go to grandma's. You're going, or to work. Let's go to work. You're thinking about what you're going to do after you get out of work. You're not thinking about driving. You're not like, I need to hit the brake here. I don't want to go over 35. These are things that you do to a certain extent automatically. And just so you can reach a state, a light trance state as well. You also go through trance states as you're falling asleep and as you're waking up. That's called the hypnagogic state, which, by the way, mystagogus deck, like hypnagogic. So hypnagogic as you're going to sleep, hypnopompic as you're waking up. Which, by the way, just from an etymology standpoint, I feel like hypnopompic should be, you're going to sleep, because a psychopomp is somebody who takes souls from the world of the living to the world of the dead. Which, doesn't that sound like sleep? Maybe not. Because I'm like, well, you're waking up, you're coming into, ooh, wait a minute, maybe what that means is it's the hypnopompic state, because when we sleep, that's when we're really alive. Yeah, that's pretty groovy, pretty deep. And maybe I should leave it at that, because I've just hit 2 hours, which was what I was looking for. I will say this much, though, regarding the hypnopompic states and whether or not real life is the true death. Further research is required. All right, well, Matt, thank you so much for being here, and Angela and Camille and Thistle, Genevieve, I know. There's a lot of people here with teeth, and we had Ash over there, Jen. I do want to say thank you to all of you. Angela, I'm going to answer your question in a sec. I do these things because I think they might be fun, and if anybody shows up whatsoever, it always means so much to me. So thank you to all of you for sure. So Angela, your point, you would not knowingly allow someone to put you under their spell. I wouldn't call it a spell. The other thing too is that you're right. In order for like a client and hypnotist relationship to be good, there has to be a lot of trust. And if it's difficult for you to trust, then it is difficult for you to be hypnotized. It's kind of funky. It turns out people, you would think that the opposite. Usually if you have a lower IQ, it's more difficult to hypnotize you. Higher IQs usually correspond to more easily hypnotized. And I have a guess on this, and I don't know if it's entirely true, but people with lower IQs tend not to trust as much, because they're like, oh, I don't understand what's going on, so I don't trust it. I'm making guesses. Might be wrong. Whereas people with higher IQs are like, well, I can kind of analyze this situation and have a general idea of what's going on, and I don't know. But obviously those two are not, mutually exclusive. So it's a good question. You would need to be with somebody you trusted, for sure. And that's when you do a consultation with somebody for hypnosis, the number one thing you have to do is establish that trust. So there you go. Hopefully that answers that. So, Camille, it's going to be a video on demand, so thank you for being here. Also, thank you for saying I look beautiful. And Angela, by the way, I knew you had a high IQ. That's why I said those two are not, it's not a Venn diagram, right? There's people who trust, people who have a high IQ, people who have low IQ. I think that there's a greater tendency for people with lower IQs not to trust. But there's a lot that happens in your life, and clearly you struggle with trust. That's okay. So, all right, everybody, I'll give you another heart. Thank you, and I'll see you next week. Well, I guess I'll see you Tuesday if you wanted to show up. So, bye.